Days of days, pseudoscience just a big charade, making theories they just can't explain, on philosophically biased claims. Days of days, we break away just like a renegade, so pay attention, gonna get a grade. With school and globus till they all awake. School and globus with diplomas and a chip on the shoulder. Debate is over, mind is sober, solar system disclosure. Can't go back once you heard the facts. We make a pact, never take the backs. School and ballers and the followers that give them the dollars. They try to holler in the chat that you're a fraud, not a scholar. They hating y'all, that's why they attack. The earth is flat no matter how much they laugh. Days of days, pseudoscience just a big charade, making theories they just can't explain, on philosophically biased claims. Days of days, we break away just like a renegade, so pay attention, gonna get a grade. We school and globus till they all awake.
In a world. All right. The long-awaited return of Schooling Glovers. I think for some reason it didn't shoot through to the other platforms. Not sure why, but oh well. It is what it is. I can't actually do it now. It's too late. Even though I set it all up, I don't see that it's going through, but whatever. So we're on YouTube only. So I'm calling this season 2. We obviously took a bit of a break. And I'll break down the general premise of the show. I kind of did in the description, but there is a mainstream model of the Earth, and the vast majority of people believe in it, certainly prior to hearing any type of challenge or alternative positions or really informing themselves about exactly what that model is or what it claims. And so the premise of the show is to teach people, certainly those who believe in the mainstream globe Earth heliocentric model, exactly what it is, because of course prior to holding a belief you should at the least understand what that belief is, and you should actually fully understand it and be able to substantiate it prior to having a justified belief. But it requires just blind belief to not even know what it is you're believing and say, well, everyone else agrees or someone else did the work for me. And I found out that's the case. Almost everyone that believes in this mainstream model and thinks it's legitimate doesn't know anything about it. They also typically aren't familiar with how to logically approach a situation. And so that's what this first episode will be about. It's the burden of proof. And this is a struggle in this conversation. It is very rarely properly applied. And it's very interesting. So, of course, if you went to pretty much any schooling system, including private schools, you weren't really taught logic, and I think there's a reason for that. They want workers, not thinkers. And so we're going to examine this topic. We're going to start by laying out just a basic concept of the logic. This should be a pretty quick episode, pretty simple episode. I'll try to keep it very simple. If you're having trouble accepting what I put in this episode, then you're not going to be able to figure out anything to do with what we're talking about in the series. If you're instinctively rejecting it because it's coming from me, if you're having some type of emotional reaction, if you're denying what I'm about to explain, it's very weird, it's dishonest, it's intellectually dishonest. And it's basically just a symptom of cognitive dissonance. So that is the case. We're going to lay it out. What I'm laying out here is just objective in terms of logic. So we're going to jump right into it. If you want to support the stream, Ko-fi.com/Witsit. You can also support on YouTube. I think I'm still monetized. I forgot to check last time. So shout out to the 2 super chats I missed in the last episode. And sorry we're not on other platforms. Not sure what happened, but it is what it is. All right. So let's go ahead and pop this on here. And we'll do it like this. All right, so burden of proof. Let me scoot over. Let me know if the quality is good or if anything needs to be changed. All right. So cover a couple basic things here. The burden of proof in a debate. And what I will do is I'll explain it with me on screen, and I'll pop it full screen if anyone wants to take screenshots throughout for each slide. So in debate, maybe we'll do it like this actually. In a debate, the burden of proof refers to the obligation on a party to provide sufficient evidence and warrant for their position or claim. This concept is rooted in the Latin phrase, I'm going to butcher this, onus probandi incumpetit qui decit, whatever it is in Latin, meaning, quote, the burden of proof lies with the one who affirms, not the one who denies. I'm going to repeat that. The burden of proof lies with the one who affirms, not the one who denies. This has, of course, also been integrated into the court system. This is an ancient principle of logic. It roots from the logical acknowledgement that was originally in Latin. And again, it's very, very simple concept. The burden of proof lies with the one who affirms, not the one who denies. So this is very important in this conversation because oftentimes, people act like whoever denies or doesn't just blindly accept whatever they conceive the mainstream model to be, almost none of the people that believe in it even know what it is. And they typically have a different version of it in their mind they think it is, and it's not actually even what the mainstream model is to this date. It has been revised many, many times due to necessity out of various falsifications of previously existing theories. And this happens all the time. So here I've kind of put three primary ideas here I think are very important. Number one, positive claims. The positive or the position making a positive claim has the burden of proof. Very simple. Number two, falsification is independent of replacement. A postulation is not accepted as true merely due to the fact that the claim has not been replaced. The falsification of an idea is entirely independent of replacing it. And number three, shifting the burden of proof. The burden of proof does not lie on the party challenging the positive assertion. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of each of these. So obviously, if I say there's a unicorn in my closet, I have the burden to substantiate that positive claim. Very simple. Everyone understands it. Falsification is independent of replacement. I use the adoption analogy oftentimes. That I go down the hallway, I find some papers in my parents' closet. It's labeled do not open. I open it. I find out that it's this file of papers that says I was actually adopted. And I'm an adult now. My whole life I've thought those were my true biological parents. I've just discovered they actually are not. It has DNA tests. It has proof that they're actually not my parents in there and that I'm adopted. I see all my adoption papers. I go up to you and I say, dude, you're never going to believe this. Everything I believed to be true was a lie. I'm actually adopted. And then you say, wait, what are you talking about? Oh, we know your parents. I've been to your house many times. I know your parents. Yeah, but turns out they're not actually my biological parents. Those are my adopted parents. And then you say, wait, what are you talking about? Everyone knows those are your parents. The church, the people at the church know those are your parents. The people at the school, the people at the all throughout the community, everyone knows that those are your parents. Do you think everyone's in on this lie? And I said, well, no, I wouldn't logically think that everyone was in on the lie. They also just believe that they're my real parents, but they're not. And then you say, well, who are your real parents then? That's a good question. I don't know. I would like to find out. I'm interested in finding my real parents. But what I do know is this is the evidence that those are not my real parents. Like here's just the actual evidence that they adopted me. They're not my real parents. If you were to respond with, well, until you can tell me who your real parents are and replace the parents I believe to be yours with the true parents, then I'm going to keep believing that those are your biological parents. That would be incredibly ridiculous, right? Everyone understands how insane that would be. That makes no sense. The falsification that they are my biological parents is independent of whether or not I can replace them with my true biological parents. Falsification is independent of replacement. Very important concept to understand in terms of logic in general, certainly in this conversation. And that is because the mainstream model has made many, many extraordinary claims, and I'm sure you've heard extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we now live in a paradigm where people are telling us what a star is made of 46 billion light years away. Okay, so if I tell you the evidence suggests that's not the case, you just made that up, you can't prove that, it's logically fallacious in and of itself, it's pseudoscience. Well, then what is the star made of and how far away is it? And until you can tell me, then my claim remains true. That's not how that works. It's ridiculous. Okay, number 3. Shifting the burden of proof. The burden of proof does not lie on the party challenging the positive assertion. Now, this is, we get this one a lot, right? If I say, okay, you're claiming that the Earth is a globe and is a certain size. Well, look, here's a physical measurement that falsifies it. Well, what is it then? Well, then how do eclipses work? Well, then where's your map? It doesn't matter. Or if someone sends, here's another good example of this one specifically. Someone gives you an alleged video of an astronaut in space. And they're like, this guy is sitting out in a vacuum of 10 to the negative 17 torr. He's just floating around casually, fixing the outside of the ISS. And you say, okay, I don't necessarily believe that. I see a bunch of glitches there. I've seen pretty compelling evidence that they're faking these videos where they claim to be in space. They've been caught dropping things. They've been caught wearing wires. And I can't independently verify that. So I'm going to challenge that claim. I'm going to deny it. I don't blindly believe that claim. And the person says, prove it's fake. That's not how that works. That's a shifting the burden of proof fallacy. It's what you always hear. Prove it's fake. No, prove it's real. You can't prove it's real because you can't independently verify it. This is very important. If I showed you a video of Sasquatch in my backyard and I said, look, there's video proof that Sasquatch is real. And then you said, what? I don't believe that's really a video of Sasquatch. And I said, prove it's fake. Could you prove it's fake? What if you couldn't prove it's fake? Does that mean that really is Sasquatch and Sasquatch is real? Of course it doesn't mean that. It could have just been my buddy dressed up like Sasquatch and I really took a video of him running through my backyard. You don't get to claim that the video is real proof of Sasquatch and that Sasquatch is real until the other party proves the video is fake. Very simple logic. And people understand all these concepts and all of these analogies and examples I'm giving. But when it comes to this conversation about the current model of the Earth, all logic goes out the window. People become like emotionally illogical robots of the machine that must now attack you and can't seem to apply simple, basic logic. It's very fascinating. And so at the least, on the surface, pun intended, this conversation is extremely beneficial in elucidating the inability of the general public to apply logic properly. And it's a great teaching tool at the least. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Who has the burden of proof? In a debate, both the affirmative proponent and a negative opponent have a burden of proof. The affirmative has the initial burden to establish their claim, while the negative has the burden to refute the affirmative's claim and provide an alternative perspective. Now, notice I did not put an alternative claim, a replacement of the claim, an alternative perspective, a rebuttal. Okay, so number 1, positive assertion. Again, the affirmative positive position has the initial burden to establish their claim. Initial burden being the key phrase there. And then number 2, the negative assertion. The negative has the burden to refute the affirmative's claim. Okay, now, what we use in logic to present an idea or to make a claim is called an argument. We present arguments in order to support our claims. Okay, arguments are supposed to be logical and reasonable. They're supposed to utilize reason and logic. Now, throughout the years, we have established a very solid parameter or very solid parameters for what is logical, what is logically admissible, what is logically fallacious. If something is established to be logically fallacious, it is logically inadmissible. It doesn't actually logically follow that argument proves the claim. It doesn't substantiate the burden of proof. In fact, it is as if it never existed. We're back to the claim just being baseless. That is the way that debate works. That's the way that logic works. Now, there is something called the fallacy. It's the assumption that because someone's argument is fallacious, that means that their conclusion is wrong. This is obviously not correct. Someone can poorly argue for a point that is true, right? Someone can use a fallacious argument, and although their conclusion is true, the argument that they presented isn't sufficient, reasonable evidence for that claim. For example, heat causes water to boil. And then someone challenges it and says, what? No, it doesn't, or whatever. Then you say, everyone in the world knows that heat causes water to boil. That's an ad populum fallacy, appeal to consensus, appeal to majority, appeal to population. This is fallacious. It doesn't matter what everyone in the world thinks, right? If everyone in the United States, which by the way, this wasn't the case, it was a very small percentage of the United States, believed that slavery was moral, does that actually mean it's moral? Of course not. What about when almost everyone in the world thought the earth was flat? What about when everyone in the world thought the earth was stationary? Ironically, that you can apply the exact subject that people do like improperly use arguments for to explain this concept. So there is something called the fallacy. Just because the argument's fallacious doesn't mean the conclusion is incorrect. Okay, but in order to substantiate your argument, you must provide empirical evidence that can be verifiable, and you must present it in a form that is logically valid. This has been known for as long as humans have reasoned, which means as long as they've existed. Okay. Next, we have, again, shifting the burden of proof, which we covered, but I put back in here because it's very important. I think it might be in here a third time. It's the number one thing that we get. Shifting the burden of proof fallacy occurs when the affirmative party shifts the burden to the party challenging or denying the positive claim or assertion. Again, let's just use the space analogy. Just because you present a video that's allegedly of people in space and I challenge or deny it, you don't get to say, okay, prove it's fake. You don't get to shift the burden over to the person challenging or denying your positive assertion. That is not how that works. You must provide legitimate evidence in a logical format. Okay. Now, a very important concept here, Occam's razor. And this is the simplest as is applied in terms of logic or oftentimes science. It's one of the initial steps to discovering what is true. When we have two competing theories that make exactly the same predictions, the simple one is most likely to be true. Now, does that mean it actually is true? No, it doesn't, right? The simplest thing isn't always true. But this is a staple of logic. And because the reason is because people can come up with overly complex, even paradoxical, convoluted claims to get to the same conclusion or quote unquote prediction that a much simpler, much more logical, claim can also explain. It's much less likely that there are these crazy, improbable circumstances stacking on top of each other to give us the outcome that can be very easily and simply explained. So Occam's razor is the first step of logic in terms of trying to figure out which one of the pair of examples or answers or claims or explanations are valid. It doesn't actually mean that is the one that's valid, the one that's most simple, but it wins by default. The more complicated one that has the same prediction has to substantiate to get a leg up, basically, has to further substantiate due to the complexity. And normally this is because it requires you asserting many more things. It requires many more assumptions, etc. A good example of this is we see the sun and moon appear to be the same size in the sky. Now, Occam's razor would say the sun and moon are the same size is the most likely to be true because it's the simplest, straightforward explanation for that prediction, that we're going to see the sun and moon be the same size. And sometimes one may be closer than the other, but there will be times that they are very, very close to each other where they effectively show that they're the same size. And that's because they're the same size. Now, there's another claim that says that the moon is actually 400 times smaller than the sun, just coincidentally, by random cosmic happenstance and chance, exactly 400 times closer than the sun, so they appear to be the same size. Applying Occam's razor, obviously, the one most likely to be true is that the sun and moon are the same size. If you are now going to claim the more complicated idea is true, I spelled it with an E instead of an O. If you're going to now claim that the most complicated idea is actually true, then you have to substantiate that, because Occam's razor says you're most likely incorrect. It's supposed to be an O. All right. I can't actually edit these though. All right. Relevant, popular, fallacious reasoning. Fallacies that are oftentimes used to obscure and obfuscate the burden of proof. So here's just a few examples. Number one, argument from ignorance, which is the assumption of a conclusion or a fact based primarily on lack of evidence to the contrary, usually best described by, quote, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. This is done all the time. The assumption of a conclusion or fact based primarily on the lack of evidence to the contrary. So again, it's like making all of these claims about what the Earth is and what the Earth is doing and what's in space, and then saying, oh, well, until you can provide evidence for the contrary, then mine is true. My conclusion, I get to assume that it's true. It's like the brother of the phrase falsifications independent of replacement. Number two, argument from silence. Drawing a conclusion based on the silence of the opponent when the opponent is refusing to give evidence for any reason. For example, oftentimes when I'm in a debate, people will ask me to explain various different phenomena that they are making a definitive positive claim about. And although I may have speculations I consider significantly more viable, much more supported by evidence, oftentimes will not engage. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to remain silent on what the causal mechanism of the phenomena is, what the cause of that effect is. I'm not going to make a claim to that right now, because you're using this as a tactic to deflect and divert and obfuscate away from the fact you have the burden to substantiate what you're claiming is actually happening. Okay. And if you really take in the stuff I'm saying here, it's going to equip you in any debate where the vast majority of the public simply cannot properly support their claims. And this goes for almost every subject and almost every group of people. So the fact that I remain silent, I don't say anything, and this can be applied to writings. It's like, oh, this historical author left this out, therefore we can discredit his position because he left this event out of his. That's fallacious. That doesn't mean that what he concluded or what he presented is incorrect because he was silent on a specific event. Maybe there was convoluted contradictory evidence and he wasn't confident in his any particular conclusion, so he chose to omit it. Or maybe, and like in the case of this conversation, there isn't ample evidence to actually verify claims about stuff in quote unquote deep space. It's actually not testable. It can't be verified. It's merely philosophical, speculative, and assumptive. I'm not going to make definitive claims about it. I'm actually going to remain silent. And if I ever do discuss it, it will be prefaced as speculation because that's what it is. And your argument doesn't somehow become true, or you get to draw a conclusion based on the silence of the other party. That's stupid. Number three, shifting the burden of proof. We've covered it many times, and that's just shifting the burden of proof to the party that denies or challenges the positive claim. The Earth is a spinning sphere with a radius of 3959, and it has a core, and it's made of magma. Okay, I don't believe it's made of magma. I challenge and deny that claim. Prove it's not made of magma. Prove there isn't a core made of magma. What are you talking about? The deepest hole ever dug, 7.8 miles. You verify that actually 4,000 miles down, that you know what's there, and it's what you're claiming it is. I'm challenging and denying your positive assertion. I don't need to replace it. I don't need to prove that your claim is not true. None of that has to happen. Now, what often happens is this side its evidence is so weak and so fundamentally fallacious, and it's just a presupposition almost every time. It's always affirming the consequent and begging the question of begging the question of the very thing it's claiming to prove, that you end up just having to say, let's just fast track this. Here's the evidence that directly falsifies your claim because you can't substantiate it. You're just begging the question and affirming the consequent and reifying your concept over and over and over. Very important to understand these things if you want to get to truth. Because if your position is true, it should be logically, you should be able to logically support it. It should be reasonable. Number four. Misplaced burden of proof, failing to provide evidence to support a claim and instead demanding that the opposing party prove something else, often unrelated to the original claim. This is the number one thing we get. I'm going to read it again. A couple typos in here. Sorry, I did the presentation pretty quickly. Failing to provide evidence to support a claim, and instead demanding that the opposing party prove something else, often unrelated to the original claim. This happens all the time, dude. It's like, okay, we're here. The radius is this, or the globe is this and this and this, and it's doing this, and here's the size of it, for example. Here's the radius. Okay, well, here's the evidence that directly falsifies your claimed evidence that the Earth is a sphere with this radius. And we have long distance observations, physical measurements, long distance microwave, radio wave transmissions, etc., that far exceed the geometric physical limitations of a sphere with a radius of 3,959 miles. And then someone responds with, "Where's your map?" Well, how do you explain eclipses then? That phrase right there, well, how do you explain eclipses then? In response to the fact that they cannot provide evidence for their claim that I'm challenging, that they basically asserted, I've probably heard that 50 times. 50 times. They make a claim, I challenge it, I ask them for their actual evidence of that claim, and then they say, and I point out what's wrong with the logic, the reasoning, I point out evidence contrary to it, and then they respond with, "Oh, well, then how do you explain this?" It's a misplaced burden of proof. It's just a tactic. It's also a red herring fallacy. It's almost always a non sequitur. It's many things, but okay, moving on. As applied to this discussion, specifically about the nature of the Earth, logical application of the burden of proof standard to the cosmological debate or the discussion of the nature of the Earth. Number one, the default position. The default position is that the Earth is a stationary topographical plane based on prima facie empirical evidence. Some say facie, and that means on its face. So the default position on its face is that the Earth is stationary and that it's a topographical plane. Number two, there's an alternative claim. The claim antithetical to that default position is that the Earth is a sphere that is wobbling, spinning, and orbiting in a vacuum. Number three, proper logical process. The default empirical position has substantiated the burden of proof intrinsically. The burden of proof lies with the alternative affirmative claim. I think that slide speaks for itself. I guess I can try to explain a little bit, but so the default position, which we're about to cover a little bit more in depth, is that the Earth is stationary and that it's a topographical plane and that the stuff in the sky moves over top and around us. Objectively, mind you, this is not my opinion. This is not me making a conclusion about the nature of the Earth, and we're not even anywhere close to that right now. I'm just stating an objective, logical fact that the default position is that the Earth is stationary and it's a topographical plane. Number two, there's an alternative claim, and it's that, it's actually not stationary. It's tilted, wobbling, spinning, revolving as it revolves around the galaxy, the galactic center, as it then flies through space over 1 million miles per hour. And that it has certain layers, and that there's a core made of this doing this, and that there's an atmosphere next to a vacuum of 10 to the negative 17 torr, and that space and time bend and warp. And it goes on and on and on and on. There's an alternative claim that says, that default position, although apparently true on the surface, actually the opposite of that claim is true. The antithesis of that is actually the truth. You're like, sure, on its face it's stationary, but actually it's not stationary. It's moving in multiple different vectors. Obviously, you have the burden of proof. And then, of course, to properly apply this logically, the default empirical position is already, this is the tough one for people to swallow. The default empirical position has already substantiated the burden of proof intrinsically. That's why it's the default position. So the evidence that the Earth is stationary has been already provided. The burden of proof has been substantiated on its face. That's why it's the default position. The burden of proof at this point in the discussion lies with the party making the alternative claim. Very simple stuff. All right. So the alternative claim is number one, of course, that the Earth is spherical. And it is specifically claimed that the Earth is a sphere with a radius of 3,959 miles. Number two is that it's in movement, or that there's movement. And it is specifically claimed that the Earth is tilted on a 23.4 degree axis, wobbling, rotating 1,037 miles per hour east at the equator, 15 degrees per hour, orbiting the sun 66,600 miles per hour, orbiting the galaxy 515,000 miles per hour, and moving with the galaxy through space at 1.3 million miles per hour. These are extraordinary claims. Number 3, vacuum of space. The default empirical position has substantiated the burden of proof intrinsic. Oh, I didn't type that one out, but obviously they claim that the Earth has an atmosphere within the vacuum of space, which is 10 to the negative 17 torr. You have the burden of proof to substantiate not only the possibility of that, but the actual that's actually the case. This is another big point to make here. People think that if that proof of concept equates to truth. Like if you can prove that in concept, like in premise, right, alone, that something could be true, like an appeal to possibility, effectively. And that's a little bit more nuanced, but like if people think that proof of concept means that their point is true, and this is all you ever get with the globe is like they'll show you people that typically defend the globe. They'll show you that their claimed idea is technically possible, and they'll say stuff like get on a merry-go-round and spin it once a day. Think about how slow you're going. Do you think you'd be able to tell that you were moving? And it's like, I think yeah, but based on instruments and stuff, we'd be able to tell. But that doesn't matter. Let's just say the answer was no, that you wouldn't be able to tell you're moving, which is actually wrong. We have highly precise measurements, and it would have many different effects if that were true. And there are many different tests that prove that's not true, which we'll get onto later in the series. But the point is, let's just say you were right and that the answer was no. That doesn't mean the Earth is moving. The fact that you can say, oh, it's possible in principle, in theory, that the Earth could be moving so slow and be so big you wouldn't be able to tell. Therefore, it is moving. That's how people think. And that isn't the case at all. That's ridiculous. Think about how low of a standard that is. Now, obviously, if you can't even show it to be physically possible, you have no business even getting close to making the claim. Okay, let's continue. Wait, so wouldn't flat Earth have a burden of proof? And the answer is yes. The positive assertion that the Earth is a stationary topographical plane holds a burden of proof. Each aspect of that claim requires substantiation logically. And that would be that it's stationary and that it's a topographical plane. And I would even say enclosed topographical plane. Important side note, it's important to point out that the replacement claim of quote-unquote flat Earth is not required to challenge any other model. Falsification is independent of replacement. Positive claims of specificity have a burden of proof to substantiate those claims, period. It's very simple. Period. I don't even have to say that it's flat. I don't have to say anything to challenge your claim or to even falsify your claim. I don't need to claim that it's stationary, topographical. I don't need to do anything. That's not how that works. And this concept is so rejected in this conversation, but in real life, people would never reject such a concept. Again, we can just use the adoption analogy. What person in their right mind would say, I'm going to continue to believe that those are your biological parents, though you have direct evidence falsifying that to be the case, until you can replace the idea in my mind that they are your biological parents with another group of people, set of parents? I would actually think that you're insane, right? Somehow in this conversation, it isn't insane. It isn't completely fallacious. All right. So default position. Following are a few examples of substantiation of the default position. Specular reflections. So here we have reflections from the surface of water. We have a smooth water surface, and then we have a wavy water surface. And by the way, it's barely rippling and waving. And look at how much it distorts the image. You can't even get a specular reflection on a body of water where it's just barely got ripples and waves in it. We even call those waves, right? It's wavy. So you see the smooth water surface and you see the wavy water, right? Now, when we say smooth, specifically it is that it is flat, okay? And so here we have specular reflections in the top left, and then due to any concavity or convexity, in this next image from the top left, you see the diffused reflection. So you get a specular reflection or a diffused reflection, obviously, because you have the angle of incident and the angle of reflection. Equal angles of reflection give you a specular reflection. If the surface is not smooth, if it is not horizontal and flat, then you get a diffused reflection. You can look down for more specific examples there. And I have many more images. We'll cover this more in depth in the future. But again, to actually have a specular reflection requires equal angles of reflection. It requires a horizontal surface. Any concavity or convexity will immediately diffuse the reflection because it will, of course, begin to move off that surface in various angles relative to the curvature of the surface. So now if we see this picture here in the bottom right, or even this picture here, the default position is that we have these one-to-one specular reflections. And if you look here, this is over a salt flat. This is a long distance observation. This is many, many, many miles of clouds. The default position is that you couldn't even have this one-to-one specular reflection if the surface wasn't flat. Literally, you couldn't, because it would diffuse. It would be distorted. Look again at how you can't even tell what that reflection is at all with just slight little ripples. Now imagine this surface itself actually having an overall curvature, convexity or concavity. It would drastically distort the image. And in fact, it would distort it at a consistent rate proportionate to that curvature. You cannot get one-to-one specular reflections on its face based on the empirical evidence that we can replicate 1,000 different ways. To actually have these specular reflections, the body of water it's reflecting off of must be horizontal to give you that specular reflection again for the third time, or it would be a diffused reflection. So the default position, substantiated empirically, is that it's flat. You're going to claim to me that it's not. You need to, again, first step, prove it's even possible to have one-to-one specular reflections on a curved surface. And then number two, you have to actually prove that surface is in fact curved. Neither of those are ever done. Here's another example, long distance observations. Here in the top left, we have a distance of 167 miles, observer height of 906 feet. Target hidden feet is 11,291 feet, and the elevation of the mountain is 12,000 feet. So almost the entire mountain should be obstructed, and look how clearly you can see that mountain. And we have this all throughout the picture, right? We have this next picture to the right should be almost 3,000 feet below the curvature of the earth. Yet there we are looking at the mountains. And here we have almost the entire mountain should be obstructed again. Same thing in the next one. Almost the entire mountain should be obstructed. Here in the bottom left, we have the mountain should be almost 4,000 feet below. And so on its face, using Occam's razor, again, we are seeing the mountain that we know to be directly in front of us in that very cardinal direction with the actual shape and topography that that mountain exhibits, because we are seeing the mountain that we know to be in front of us and can verify that it's there, including with radar. We could literally get in a boat and go to it. We can get in a plane and fly to it. We can walk to it, right? So this is very simple. And people, this is what they always do. They immediately start deflecting and they say like, oh, well then why can't I see this? Why don't I see the whole mountain? Well, things change due to angular size, the horizon apparent location that rises optically. So obviously we're going to see it rise up slightly above us, and then that object's going to actually converge down into the compression point, to the vanishing point. But that doesn't matter. That's logically fallacious deflection and obfuscation. You have the burden of proof to prove that mountain isn't actually there. And what people do, again, right, in this scenario, is they think that a proof of concept somehow proves their claim true. They're like, well, we know that light can bend, so that's what's happening. The light is bending and creating the illusion that it's there. And obviously, that's a major problem for silhouettes. It's a major problem for the fact that you're going to have to claim the sun is actually doing that at the same rate as the mountains, and then you're going to have to explain the consistency of the sunset times and why they don't change drastically when we see these mountains from much further away. You're going to also have to explain how we can predict some of these observations on the two same calendar days, years in advance. We can go book a flight a year in advance and go see it because we know the sun's going to set directly behind it and then backlight those mountains, and we're going to see the silhouette. But that is the point is just the idea that you can show light can bend based on its medium doesn't somehow make your claim true that it's bending at a very specific rate in these observations. Now, there's additional falsifications of that claim, but to actually even grant it is granting fallacious reasoning. This is how poorly supported the mainstream globe model is. And this is how poorly equipped people are with logic in 2024. They think that if they can just show you a proof of concept, or even just tell you that a proof of concept could be true in theory, it equates to their claim that that is actually what's happening being true. That is so backwards and logically inept and logically bankrupt. That isn't the case. So again, objectively, the default position is we know those mountains are in front of us. We can verify it. They have been verified. And we are looking in that direction where we know the mountain to be, and we see the mountain. And in fact, the mountain will block things behind it. It will block the sun and create a silhouette. And we know that when the sun sets behind it, we're going to see the silhouette. We can predict when we're going to see it. Default position is that those mountains are in front of us. We have a direct line of sight to the mountains that are blocking the sun behind it, blocking the light behind it. Okay, so default position is, of course, that this claim that the Earth is a sphere isn't even working mathematically, but you get it. Pretty simple stuff. Here are a few alternative examples because I didn't want the presentation to be too long. Number one, survey/measurement. For all practical civil engineering, plane surveying is utilized and applied. In plane surveying, the assumption of Earth curvature is entirely ignored. A vertical plumb line is established perpendicular to the horizontal baseline that is the Earth. Again, this is used for all civil engineering. So what this means specifically is that in the real world, for all actual practical use when it comes to building runways, railways, canals, long projects, buildings, there are buildings and like factories that are many miles long. So when it comes to actual real life application of engineering, again, bridges, canals, runways, railways, we actually make plane survey measure when it comes to actual measurement in general, right? So the way that we establish elevation is in relation to this horizontal baseline, vertical plumb line perpendicular to that horizontal baseline, and we measure and we combine straight horizontal line segments to do the building. So to actually create the very infrastructure of the world that we live in, you have to utilize the understanding that the Earth is flat, completely ignoring the notion that it's curving. That objectively substantiates the default position that it is a plane. And you measure topographical deviation from that horizontal baseline. And that's exactly what we use plane survey tables for many, many centuries. Or I know at least many, many decades to get topographical deviation. Okay, number two, the lab frame. All physics is done utilizing a stationary lab frame that is the Earth. The inertial lab frame, meaning unchanging, is a prerequisite for all of physics. So to make this very simple, in all of physics, in all tests in a lab, in all of physics in general, we utilize the Earth as if it's entirely stationary. It's the prerequisite to all of physics, all experiments, all tests. Literally, it's a stationary Earth, and then we measure against that, measure in relation to that. We develop entire technologies based upon that inertial lab frame. It is a requirement. If you don't do that, nothing will work. You have to treat the Earth as stationary for all of physics. All of physics. I think I'm actually missing a page here. Let me check. Yeah. The other pages I have all these different military documents, and that goes right into the stationary lab frame, where you have aircraft and bullet trajectories and landing helicopters and developing all kinds of weapon systems, electromagnetic propagation weapon systems, and the list goes on and on and on. Obviously, there's hundreds of them. It uses a stationary lab frame and it utilizes a plain Earth, literally. Like electromagnetic propagation over a flat Earth is a document from the military utilized for ground weapon systems, meaning to actually develop the ground weapon system to actually attack your enemy via target acquirement of electromagnetic weapons. They have to use a flat Earth, specifically treating the Earth like a dielectric plane, and then deducing the target acquirement relative to the horizontal propagation over the parallel dielectric plane. Okay, so the way that we fly planes, we have to treat the Earth as a stationary plane, right? Like a flat, non-rotating surface, and we use our altimeter relative to the parallel horizontal layers of the atmo. That is how it actually works in real life. All of physics, all of travel, all of technology utilizes a stationary lab frame and utilizes a plane Earth. This should be pretty interesting. Again, this objectively substantiates the default position, and it's actually required. It's a prerequisite, a requirement prior to the fact for the efficacy of the implementation of this different technology and for the physics and experiments that have given us this technology. Fact. There's a claim on the table that, yeah, you have to treat the Earth as if it's stationary and it's an inertial lab frame. But it's not actually stationary. It's actually not inertial because it's rotating. So that means it's accelerative and it is changing. What has the burden of proof there? The one saying that the Earth is stationary. Oh, look, everything in the world, in all of physics and all technology requires applying a stationary Earth for it to work. All of the measurements are inaccurate. All the predictions are inaccurate. All of the tests are inaccurate. As soon as you don't apply a stationary Earth, okay, again, the default position has been substantiated. And if you did, imagine denying the stuff I'm saying right now. This is what makes the conversation so weird. People are so dishonest about it. Number 3, celestial measurement, navigation, the latitude system, etc., utilizes flat Earth measurement to celestial objects. A horizontal baseline is used, again, same as it is for surveying and for elevation. We take the sea level, we extend that horizontal baseline all the way out. For all surveying, we take the vertical plumb line perpendicular to the horizontal baseline. For the planes, we actually take the horizontal baseline as the Earth and then parallel horizontal layers of the atmo, and we adjust accordingly. For all, like the algorithmic deduction of the landing angle of a helicopter, we treat the Earth with a horizontal baseline. And so for any type of navigation methodology that we utilize, the fundamental measurements that were the prerequisite to that construct, including the construct of latitude, was that you establish your vertical level locally, and then you're going to utilize a horizontal baseline. A horizontal baseline is used and required for the initial measurement. This horizontal baseline is extended to the zenith ground position of said celestial observation. Very important part. So like when you do the latitude, you take Polaris, you take angle measurements, you get further from Polaris and keep taking angle measurements to it. Well, that angle measurement is literally creates a triangle with a horizontal baseline. That baseline goes all the way to the ground position where it's the zenith, meaning that Polaris would be directly above you. Isn't just this localized thing. It's a horizontal baseline that goes all the way out, and that's how you get these concentric circles that are the latitude system. The prerequisite for the latitude system that people utilize, even in this globe model claim, was flat Earth measurements objectively. So again, this substantiates logically the default empirical position that the Earth is a plane. That's how we get elevation as well. We extend the horizontal baseline from the sea level all the way into the interior of a continent, for example. We measure a vertical distance above that horizontal baseline. It is perpendicular to that baseline, and that's how we get elevation. Number 4, of course, experience. The default empirical position based on observation and experience is that the Earth is a stationary plane and that all celestial quote-unquote bodies move over top and around. And again, people will say, you can't always trust your senses. Here's an example. Like proof of concept doesn't equate to truth or proof of whatever claim that you're making. That would be such an asinine, inept standard to apply. Therefore, you would then be forced to treat almost everything as true as long as someone could give you any type of proof of concept. So it's very simple. In all of these scenarios, it is claimed that, well, the Earth is a sphere. I promise it's just so big. And yeah, sure, it's tilted, wobbling, spinning, revolving, flying through space. But there's the bending and warping of space and time. And it's just, you can't tell. It makes it appear that it's stationary. So you're going to have to use it as if it's stationary. It's so big and there's so much going on with the light that always makes it look like it's flat. And the radar looks like it's flat, and the measurements have to be taken as flat, but actually it's curved, actually it's wobbling, actually it's spinning, actually it's orbiting, actually it's flying through space. Those claims are antithetical to the default empirical position, therefore objectively have the burden of proof. The burden of proof for the stationary topographical plane has intrinsically been substantiated. Intrinsically has been substantiated. So the claim, again, making the antithetical claim to the default empirical position that has been substantiated has the burden of proof. Shifting the burden of proof is fallacious and saying, oh, well, you're challenging or denying my claim that actually it appears to be flat, but it's curved. So prove it's not curved. No. What are you talking about? I'm making a claim that the Earth is a stationary topographical plane, although that claim is not required to falsify or challenge your claim. But I do make that claim, right? I do make the claim. And so it's substantiated as the default position. And this is just objective. It's objective. And the sooner that you can acknowledge that that is true and like, okay, yeah, the stationary topographical plane position, the flat Earth as it's called, is the default position. If you can't honestly just acknowledge that, then you're not even capable of actually entering this conversation with intellectual honesty. You have a 0% chance of coming to any type of logical conclusion. Your position is inadmissible in intellectual forum. It's inept. It's irrelevant. It's logically bankrupt and inadmissible. And so wouldn't you want to at the least have a justified belief where you have substantiated and understood what it is that you hold to be true? Now, obviously, what we're going to do in this series is we're going to actually go specifically into many of these claims, the alleged rebuttals, the alleged substantiations, etc. But what always happens, and the number one thing that we get here, I think this is the final slide. The number one thing that we get with a lot of this is people just affirm the consequent. If I assume the Earth's a sphere, then this is how Eratosthenes would work. If I assume the Earth's a sphere, then the light would have to be bending at this rate for me to see those mountains hundreds of miles away and thousands of feet, even miles below the Earth's curvature. Well, if I assume the Earth's a sphere, then that would mean something has to be happening to create the illusion that we can see the mountains directly in front of us with line of sight. So therefore, that is what's happening. Just affirming the consequence. Also reifying the concept of the sphere. Same thing with the core of the Earth, right? People just reify the concept. So to recap, it's very simple, actually, right? The position making the positive claim, the positive assertion, the affirmative party has the burden of proof. And if they provide evidence for it and substantiate it legitimately, then the party making the negative assertion or challenging it would then has the burden to rebut or refute that position. That's how it works. And it isn't much more complicated than that, right? And like claiming like, oh, since you're not claiming to know what the eclipse or the stars are, then my claim is true is stupid, right? Argument from ignorance, argument from silence. Typically, you'll get straw man fallacies there. You'll get red herring fallacies, non sequiturs. You'll get affirming the consequent, reifications, appeal to consensus, appeal to majority. You'll get poisoning the well. You'll get hasty generalizations. You'll get the slippery slope, right? And none of those, they're all fallacious. And the burden of proof is substantiated based on empirical evidence and logic. And again, for like the 1,000th time, the claim that the Earth is a stationary topographical plane is intrinsically, fundamentally the default position based upon logical and empirical parameters. You have the burden of proof to substantiate the opposite. Now, people spiral and they freak out. And they're like, oh, it's because he doesn't have evidence of a flat Earth. It's like, We just covered all the evidence that substantiates it as the default position. That's a lie. That's dishonest. Okay. The reason that I am harping on this right now to start the series, and I bring this up oftentimes, is because people are so dishonest about this conversation, whether that be cognitive dissonance or what. Sometimes it's people that are very logical, typically even. If you can't be logical about the conversation, we cannot progress with a fruitful discussion, right? So that's just the facts of the matter. All right, cool. And I'm going to keep these episodes short, and I have something I have to do. Actually, I have to like try to finish something tonight. So I'm going to keep it short. I think we're like right at an hour. I'm going to check the donations, and then in the future, I may open it up to where I bring people back on. I don't think I'm going to do like entire rooms. I mean, we'll see. I'll get feedback from people and stuff like that. But I may do it where you have to be on camera. You have to believe in the mainstream model, and you have to disagree with the stuff said in the stream specifically. With specificity, you have to address the topic, and you need to be on camera. And I'll send you the link. You come in, you'll pop in on camera. You just easily put your name in there. Blah blah blah. I think I might do that. Now I'll consider going back towards where we have this whole setup. We have the whole room where we were going in like Earth Awakenings Discord. I'll get your guys' feedback. Tell me what you think. But I'm not going to do like 4-hour streams again. So that's kind of what that inevitably turned into. All right. So that's the conclusion of just a very, both with, Middle Ground and Skull and Glovers, I guess, season 2. The first episode is like much more meta, much more simple, logical prerequisites for the conversation. It's like required understanding before you really get into the heart of it, trying to figure it out. And I'm going to try to keep these streams specific to the point and with the PowerPoint so they're not overwhelming, super long. They will also have chapters that kind of lay out each point where you can skip through it. All right, we'll just check and see if there's anything on Ko-fi. Let me check and see if there's. You can create goals on YouTube now. It's kind of cool. Matthew, thank you for the $5. Salute to Austin, all truth seekers and tellers. It's a fresh world, clean slate. Yes, sir. I can't believe that none of the other platforms went up, but it's all good. Thank you for the support. Let me check Ko-fi here. I don't think we have anything on here. We do not. Okay. All right, cool. I'm going to wrap it up. All right. If you want to support the stream, kofi.com/witsit. Also become a member. I'm putting up a poll here soon to ask a few questions about what you guys think the next, like for example, what the next in the middle should be about, and certain feedbacks on how to go forward. But please consider supporting the stream. It's what makes the stream possible. And I'm going to wrap this up. I got other stuff to do. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but it's very important for people to kind of understand what even like the base origin of this conversation is and why so many people have detached and suspended blind belief because they found out that they're so consistently misled by mainstream scientism and mocked and ridiculed and intimidated away from thinking for yourself. And I encourage, if you're new to any of the subject, to kind of combine the two, middle ground in terms of geocentrism, etc., and sculling glovers, just so that you're informed with your position at the least prior to making any type of definitive conclusion, much less confident assertion. Okay. Seek and speak truth unequivocally. The weak find contentment in the consensus of ignorance. So who cares what other people think? People attack what they don't understand, and they also attack when they're in a state of fear. And they also attack people that are strong enough to speak out against the majority or the group because they're typically not. And that's maybe envy or, again, kind of like a fear response. So who cares what people think, right? And like the scriptures say, rejoice when they revile you for his name's sake or for the truth's sake, for they did to all the prophets before you. This is a tale as old as time. So persevere the truth. Understand that it's for future generations even. And that seems really meta and kind of like too much for people, but that's just the truth. We're in a world that's so upside down. It's because so few people are willing to take personal sacrifices, take the time to actually look into these conversations and speak up about the truth once they find it. So seek and speak truth unequivocally. Once you find it, you have the obligation to speak about it. And also remember that what's true is rarely popular and what's popular is rarely true. All right, peace.
Pseudoscience just a big charade, making theories they just can't explain, on philosophically biased claims. Days of days, we break away just like a renegade, so pay attention, gonna get a grade. The school and globers till they all awake. School and globers with diplomas and a chip on the shoulder. Debate is over, mind is sober, solar system disclosure. Can't go back once you heard the facts. We make a pact, never take the backs. School and ballers and the followers that give them the dollars. They try to holler in the chat that you're a fraud, not a scholar. They hating y'all, that's why they attack. The earth is flat no matter how much they laugh. Days of days, pseudoscience just a big charade, making theories they just can't explain, on philosophically biased claims. Days of days, we break away just like a renegade, so pay attention.